You guys Tiger Kinged me. Fantastic, spectacular, give me 19 more. The sadness that I can feel emanating from this box. It's my own sadness. Do I think that the TikTok hype was a little overblown? I had so much fun talking to myself. Thanks for coming back to Most Bookish. Let's, as they say, jump right in. Today's video is going to be about TikTok. TikTok has been in the news, guys. It has been in the news. It has been a topic because it shut down. The governmento said, no mas. They had to shut it down. They were trying to force them to sell. But ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, the accusation is that they were giving sensitive information about their membership to the Chinese government because they're a Chinese entity, and that's the relationship that the Chinese government has with businesses over there. In the Supreme Court case, there's been proof shown that they have passed information to them. There's also accusations that TikTok could unduly influence the American people on the behest of the Chinese government. I will say nothing that is done by ByteDance isn't things that are done by Facebook, Instagram. MySpace doesn't still exist, does it? Anyways, the thing is though, there's a difference between a foreign government influencing Americans and the American government influencing Americans, which makes sense, right? Because it's like with your kids in your house. You influence your kids all the time. That doesn't mean that you want just anybody outside of your house influencing them. Like, you want them to be influenced by the things that you believe in. They shut down. President-elect Trump at the time said, we're gonna make a deal. We're gonna make a deal, guys. And promised them that he'd give them an extension. So they turned it back on. It was a roller coaster for the people on TikTok. I don't think long term, and I said this in my live, I don't think long term TikTok is going to be open, because at the end of the day, what now President Trump said in his statement was, you're gonna have to give up the American arm of it or a portion of it. We wanna be invested in this company. I don't see a world where ByteDance is gonna do that. Like, a lot of people see it from the American lens of like, oh my God, but it's America. You would wanna be in our market. The reality is that we're only like 8% of TikTok's dinero revenue. Almost 80% of it comes from China. And so we have no big skin in the game. And there's no reason why they should give up like technological property, because it's not just the actual app. Like, oh, well, they should sell it or they're gonna be shut down. Like, yeah, they're gonna lose that money regardless. They won't just lose the money from the future sales. Yeah, they might make some money off of the actual selling of that arm, but they're giving up their intellectual property in that process. The person who buys it has to know how to run TikTok America. So they are going to be in possession of all of those algorithmic private things that have made TikTok successful. And why would they jeopardize the other 92% of their business by selling 8% to the highest bidder? Because we want them to. With all of that said, TikTok, Booktok has been so amazing for book readers, for new book readers, for all of us who were already here, but we're feeling kind of sad about the whole book community kind of dying away, going away because so many bookstores were being shut down. And like, where were we going to have a book space? And there are other book communities. BookTube is huge. There's also Bookstagram, but Booktok, as evidenced by the tables in bookstores and the referencing and Booktok books, Booktok made reading exciting again. It made being part of that community exciting. It made everybody excited to talk to each other about what they were reading. And so people who would never have picked up a book before were starting to pick up books. I was one of those people. I went on TikTok like 2 years ago and I was like, oh my God, so many of my book people are here. And there were all the little videos and everything was so cute. And I was like, oh, that's cute. I want to read that. That's cute. I want to read that. Oh my God, they're so excited. I want to read that and that and that. And then I got the books and I opened them and I was like, oh no. That's an exaggeration. I was underwhelmed by some of the books. I was pleasantly surprised by a majority of the books. I loved some of the books. Last year, I had kind of like a stack of books that I had needed to get to for a long time, and I spent this past 2024 reading a majority of those TikTok books that I had kind of put off because there's a series on Booktok that is humongous that I read because everybody was so excited about it. And I haven't read like a fantastic series in a really long time. And there's something about a series and characters that you get to like be with for a long time that's so special. And so I was like, oh, I might get to do that again. I'm just over the moon. I started reading the first book and I was like, you guys Tiger Kinged me. If you recall from the pandemic, everybody was talking to each other online all the time because we were locked in the house, and Tiger King became so popular, and I had to watch it after everybody that I knew was like, oh my god, this is wild. And I'm watching it like an episode in and I'm like, what did you guys just send me into? Like, what did you just... Where am I right now? And that's how I felt reading ACOTAR. I know you're not gonna like it. I know so many people love this series. I wanted to love the series so much. After I started reading it, I got a box. Listen, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. We're gonna talk about that in a second because we're starting somewhere else. So I have the best and the worst. However, things aren't black and white, right? So I have the best of the best and the worst of the best, worst of the worst, and the best of the worst. Best of the best is fantastic, spectacular, give me 19 more. Worst of the best is, I really like the book. Was it the most amazing thing I've ever read? No. Do I think that the TikTok hype was a little overblown? Possibly. You could read it. Should read it. You might like it more than I did. It's a recommend. It's a recommend. It's not a, oh, you have to read this, but it's a recommend. And then of the worst, there is the best of the worst, which is like, it wasn't bad. I didn't have to force myself through it, but I don't think I would buy anything from this author again because it's just kind of not for me. It might be for you. And then there's the worst of the worst. Lo más malo. Really? What did you do to me? Why did you Tiger King me? I'm never forgiving you. That's a bit much. I don't mean that. Listen, reading is a journey. TikTok started so many people on this journey, or restarted them after a lot of years. And reading is like a muscle. When I started reading books in quantity, they were kids' books. It was like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which still bangs to this day. Once I started reading more diverse stories in my teen years, they were basic. I read so much romance, so much romance. They were basic, they were feel good, they were exactly what I needed at the time. It was sprinkled with like some Holocaust survivor stories. It was the 90s, it was great. However, I probably would not read like 97% of those books today. Today, I understand that some of these books that I thought were like fantastic because they were fantastically written and the story was fantastic were actually fantastic because the community was excited about going on this journey, and I did not understand the difference. And so now I understand that I have to preview the books first before I go to the store and do things like this. We learned our lesson. That's what life's about. It's about learning lessons, guys. Now, I will tell you that like my mild feeling stacks are bigger than my strong feeling stacks. There was a lot of good stuff on TikTok. I feel like they get so much more of a bad rap than they deserve. I had a lot of TikTok books after I read ACOTAR and I was traumatized and I was like, oh my god, are they all like this? And I didn't read so many books in fear. And then I picked up The Song of Achilles and I was like, oh, this was a good book. And then it was off to the races. Best of the worst. We're starting with Cassandra Clare, beloved author on Booktube because Booktube predates TikTok. These are the Infernal devices. I feel like she is a TikTok author in the sense that she comes up a lot in conversation when people are talking about their favorite fantasy books. It's well written. She's a good author. What I will say is that people are in love with these characters. I was not in love with these characters. It's a love triangle. I don't think I cared who she ended up with. I thought these were for me because there's a love triangle and we always love a love triangle. They're based in London and we always love a story in London, eh? And it's fantasy and I love fantasy. Why we didn't end up loving it is because there are demons, there are shadow hunters, there's like things that go bump in the night. None of it felt like there were real stakes. I ended up feeling more than anything that it was an idea of a story with with this love triangle, they tried to create urgency around those two things. I don't think it felt urgent. If you like Demons, Hunters, London, and love triangles, you can check it out. If you're gonna try it, you have been forewarned. Next one, The Poppy War. Poppy War is also a trilogy. I have the other two somewhere up there. It's by RF Kuang. This is my next one on Best of the Worst. I'll tell you a little story. I bought these at the same time that I bought Babel, because I had bought Babel, that again, all of TikTok was talking about. Like, that was definitely a TikTok book. I realized somewhere in there in the reviews that everybody kept referencing The Poppy War and that this was like her amazing series. So I said, if we're in for a penny and for a pound, let's get to Poppy War. I have to tell you, thank God I got these, because I started reading Babel and I think I got like 3 pages in and I was like, you guys can't make me do this. You can't make me do this. You cannot force me to read this. It felt so slow. It felt so painful. It was so difficult to start. I was confounded by how people felt about that book. And so I had these and I'm like, there's 3 of them. This is fantasy. It's not dark academia. Maybe I'll like it better. And I started reading them. I will tell you, the story and the history is fantastic. RF Kuang does history and research like no other. Fantastic. The character development, not so great. There is this thing that newer authors do where they have the story, they have the world, but characters are really hard for them. And you can tell that they're hard for them when everybody sounds a bit angry. Like, writing dialogue is extremely difficult. That's why not everybody's a writer. If people sound in your mind when you're reading it snarky or confrontational all the time, it's usually because it's a newer writer who has not mastered the art of dialogue yet. And RF Kuang is one of those people, I'm sorry to say. However, the story for all 3 books is really fantastic. This would be an amazing movie, but a movie would probably never do it justice. It's a heartbreaking story about a young girl who goes to kind of like a military school for people to unearth their gifts and be a part of the resistance movement. The world that it's created in is not real. It's the Nakara Empire. However, it's based off of Chinese and Japanese history, like their kind of conflict history. Also, China's conflict history with the West and Europeans. It's just so wonderfully written outside of the characters. I really wanted to love Rin. I kept trying to love her over and over again. Outside of what she was presenting in the story, I don't feel like there was anything beneath the surface for her or any of the other characters. I will say, I kept going. Like, I read these and so I said, read Babel! And I forced myself. And I'm gonna tell you what I thought about that in a second, because that's in a different pile. She's getting there. Like, there are people who are newer writers and you're like, I don't think they're ever gonna get there. I'm not doing this again. RF Kuang is going to get there. Her next book's coming out this year. I'm gonna get it already. Yellowface was better than both of these, also in a pile over here. And so I'm excited for the one this year. And by the time she's written her like 10th book, she's probably gonna be unstoppable, because again, the research, the world building in here, top notch. Why I thought I was gonna love it. Fantasy. I love reading dystopic or historical or cultural stories that are not European, that are not American, because that feels like the story that's told over and over and over again. I want to learn things about different parts of the world that were not always taught in the United States of America. So that's why I thought it was for me. Why it ended up not being for me, again, was the character development. It just killed me. It killed me over and over again. There were people who I wanted to love so bad and I would start to love them, and then it would get clunky and I'd be like, damn it! That's that. Last of the best of the worst. This is supposed to be 9th house. It is not 9th house. It is Hellbent, which is the second of the duology, of the 9th house duology. 9th house is the first one, this one's the second one. 9th house is supposed to be here, but I lent it to somebody. So we're just gonna hold this guy up. It's the best of the worst because I did like the characters. Conversely from the Poppy War, I really like the characters in 9th house. I loved Alex. Alex, short for Galaxy. Of course, you're gonna love her. The story was really good. I ended up saying that it was the best of the worst because the stakes felt high and then they kind of fizzled out. There are people who got hurt and like mysteries to solve. There was way more focus on the solving of the mysteries and what was going on between the people solving the mysteries and the actual story of the mystery to be solved. They were kind of like throwaway circumstances. So while you got to love the characters, you just kind of ended up feeling like they were doing the same thing repetitively. Like it started to feel like an episode of Law and Order SVU. You know what I mean? Like kind of once this story ends, nobody really cares about the dead guy in the alley, but like that was a person. And I feel like stories like that translate way better to television, to episodic television. I feel like this would be fantastic as a show, and I don't know if they made it a show, but if they haven't, they should. And it just kind of got worse with this one. Like at least Ninth House, I was like up till late trying to find out how it was gonna end. I was very interested. But by the time we got starting into this guy, I was like, man, this needs to be over soon. I had a similar experience with this one in that I had read the duology for Six of Crows before I read this, and so I did not write Leigh Bardugo off. And I'm so glad that I did because that's in another pile and it's in a good pile and I love that story. I would not have probably read any more Leigh Bardugo after these, not because the stories were so bad, but just because like suspense mystery whodunit is not really my jam anyways. Then not having loved how this fizzled out would have made me be like, oh, that's what she writes, that's not really for me, and that's not what she writes. Leigh Bardugo is a fantastic storyteller. This just wasn't the story. Why I thought I was gonna love it, it was Leigh Bardugo, honestly. Like I had just bought these, I didn't know what they were about, and I was like, jam, it's her, I'll read anything she writes. She has a gift for characters. You see it in the Six of Crows, you see it in here, and so even though I'm like, you know, 50-50 of good and bad, I'm staying on the train. Why I didn't love it was because the stakes were like phony. They were phony baloney. The worst of the worst. These are not the worst of the worst books that I read last year. These are not the worst of the worst books ever written. These are the worst of the TikTok popular books. All of these tabs, everything folded down in here, is the things that made me angry. Babel is dark academia. It's about this young man named Robin who ends up with a scholarship type situation to an academy that's related to Cambridge. It's not just open to wealthy people because this is the 1800s. So there's no education for all type deal. This is like lords and not even the ladies. The lords get to go to Cambridge. There were no women allowed back then. He's Chinese. He gets raised in Britain after his family dies. He's raised by this kind of academic mentor, you would call it, who is funding his education. It's for the purpose of him being able to learn how to embed his language into bars of silver that fuel the London of this time. So they do all kinds of modern things that kind of exist today, but in the 1800s, there's like automated carriages that are run by bars of silver. There are all kinds of inventions and things, stupid things for rich people that are being made, and the cost of making them is colonizing other countries, it's exploiting their people, it's abusing foreigners, and we know that story, right? Like that's all familiar. And so she does use this as a way to critique the colonizer, which is Great Britain in particular at this time, but it's colonizers all over the world. That critique is so well thought out and so well articulated, and it would have been fantastic in a nonfiction format because just the sheer volume of information that she presents in this book about the etymology of words, the history of oppression through language. It is impressive. I would read that book. I would give that the best of the best. However, instead, she puts this in the mouths of teenagers and it's as exposition, and there's so much declaiming. The characters were so busy explaining ideas that RF Kuang was trying to get across that you don't actually get to know any of them. It could have been a really tragic story story, but it doesn't feel that way because you don't ever feel fully invested in who these characters are. They play stereotypes of themselves. I wish that wasn't the case, but again, like I said with the Poppy War, she's still in her struggle phase of writing people, but it's getting better. Like, they're not as angry. In the Poppy War, they were angry, so they don't sound as angry here. She got rid of that part. She's evolving. But here, she got rid of the anger, but they were boring. But in the Poppy War, I wanted to love those characters. Like, she made people that you were like trying to love with all your might. Here, I just stopped talking. So that's that. Why I thought I was gonna love it, the whole academia part, the whole dark academia thing, I don't know if it's my bag. I've read a couple now. Still haven't found somebody who's made dark academia interesting. It feels like dark academia books tend to create these worlds in which like 18-year-olds are at the center of controlling the like known powers that be. They're part of this larger network that makes all these decisions for the world. That's doable, I suppose, because like Harry Potter was that, right? Like, he ends up saving the world. But there's a difference between saving the world at that age and controlling the world at that age. I feel like the formality of being in control of that much just doesn't come off so well with people of that emotional state. Like, they're still stupid. They're still 18. They're still ridiculous. And yet they're like, you know, all powerful and serious with it. Like, I need you to not take yourself seriously. You're 18. I'm gonna keep going because I like the idea. Like, I like college. I like that whole life. I'm down for some young adult books. I'm just trying to find one that's good. If you guys know one that's good, drop it in the comment box. And now, the sadness that I can feel emanating from this box. It's my own sadness. This is such a cute box. I love the colors. I wanted this to be a jam, like a pajama jam. So bad. And so bad is what it ended up being. What is this story? It is about a girl who's badass, like a regular girl who's badass, kept her family of her and her sister and her father alive. It's in a different world, so it's not, I can't give you like a timeline, but it's olden times, right? Like, they live in like a little hut in the forest, and she like catches things and feeds them. And a note that I made when I was first reading this was that she is every hero put together. Like, she was Katniss Everdeen and she was Harry Potter, and like, she was all of the things, but she's not. I actually like the personalities of the people in here. I do like her as a personality. I don't love the writing. I don't love how this feels like a vehicle for like shadow daddies. That's an internet term, apparently. I don't like how she's known people for like 2 days and she's like, he growled at me. And I was like, yeah. It's just not my vibe. The growling, you guys can keep the growling. Like, unless it's an actual animal, don't growl. I actually have a real life story about that. Listen, don't do it. I am not going to ruin anybody's experience of this. I'm not going to spoil alert anything. It's very well known in the internets that book one is very hard to get through. But people say like, once you push through book one, then you love it. Book one was very hard to get through. It was slow. Book two was faster, but like, the stakes were completely made up. The land and the world that she was building could have been really impressive. Like, it could have been Star Wars type impressive. Like, their whole little insulated worlds, and she had a chance to build each of those worlds. How they interplayed in the story could have been really great, and they just weren't. She built these huge things and then suck them in to something really small. At the end of book two, there's kind of like a twist that I just slammed the book shut and I said, I don't care how this story ends. I don't care how many people have drawn pictures of these people on the internet. I don't care how many people love them. I don't care. I don't care what happens to these people. I want to pretend like I never read these. I'm so angry. She's a badass. That's one of the like great things about the story. It's why I like pushed through and kept reading. It wasn't for the sexy guys. Like, they're okay, but she was like rough and tough. I loved it. And then book two ends like that. And I'm like, I don't know if it gets fixed later. I don't care. That trope, I hope I never read it again. I don't like that trope in the year 2024, which is when I read this, for a badass female character. I don't. Why I thought I would love it? The whole internet said, do it. I really wanted another series in my life that I could enjoy for a long time, and an active series because she's still publishing, and it didn't happen. Why I ended up not loving it, it's just not adding up. Like, her thing she had to defeat in the first one is like she ran through a maze in a bunch of circles from like, it was just not, no. If you're at the start of your reading journey, maybe it's fabulous for you. I won't. We're getting down to the good stuff. So here's my pile of worst of the best. It means that they were good books, but they were not spectacular. And that's okay. They're actually really good books. So Mexican Gothic, I really like. It's really well told. It's written by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. She is a beloved author. She is a really good writer. It's a story about Noemi Taboada set in Mexico in the 1950s. It's kind of classic Gothic. Woman gets trapped by evil men in spooky house. The way she gets there and her type of character are interesting, like especially for the 1950s. You love how self-possessed she is, how she's kind of coming in to challenge this absolutism that the men have in their family. She's coming to save her cousin. The only reason I would not say that this is the best of the best, because I feel like Gothic is supposed to be something that makes you feel uncomfortable. Makes you feel uncomfortable because it's like the things haunting you in real life. But I feel like Gothic has become locking women inside of spooky places. I just really wanted this to be something more than that. How spooky it was and how they got out and kind of the themes that were explored were, I just, like, as soon as she went up to the house, I wanted to be like, don't go in there. Oh no. You know, I kind of wanted to be more surprised in that. Why I thought I would love it, the author is really fantastic and I love the idea of 1950s Mexico. Why I didn't end up loving it is because there were a lot of things that were just a little too familiar. I wish it was a little more surprising. Best of the worst. No, what is this? Worst of the best. I'm confusing myself. Worst of the best. Fourth Wing, I'm gonna tell you guys. If you want an internet sensation across the nation, a TikTok book that everybody's talking about, if it's between ACOTAR and Fourth Wing, go with Fourth Wing. It is a fantastical world, same idea. It is romantasy, same idea. I would say the world is a bit smaller because it's based out of the first two books are mostly based out of like a couple of locations, even though the third book just came out and that's supposed to like bring in more of a world. I don't know. Characters are much better written. The writing is much better writing, and nobody besides the dragons are growling at anybody. And the dragons have good personality. If you can give good personality to like animals, then you're a pretty good writer. There are some things, you know, there are things that are simplistic. There are things that she could have done better. The second book gets a lot of flack for kind of being a replay of the first book with just like a couple of minor tweaks. It's the story of Violet Sorrengill. She has to go to this war college. Kind of sounds like poppy war. She has to go to this war college to be trained to be a dragon rider. That is her world first defense against invasion, the bad guys, whatever. She's like the stereotype of frail. She can't do it. She's underestimated. And then it turns out that she's like a badass who's gonna end up leaving everybody in the dust because she's just so fantastic. And of course there's a love interest. Why I thought I was gonna love it, again, the talks told me I needed to have it, and this was early on when I trusted them. I was happy that I did. I love a dragon. There's very few dragon stories that I have not liked. Like, usually people who write about dragons are decent writers. I wonder if that's a thing. Eragon, Game of Thrones, How to Train Your Dragon. I feel like they're all decent. This is a decent, fun time. It's not gonna be the most spectacular thing you ever read. This is not like, oh my god, this is my new favorite series, but it's gonna be a fun time. And it's a pretty quick read, because like, it's propulsive. I didn't love about it, why it didn't end up being the best of the best, is that it's still a pretty simplistic story. Predictable. She's all frail. You know that she's gonna end up kicking everybody's butt. And that's okay though. It's okay that it was what it was. Yellowface. This one was another TikTok book that was talked about a lot. It was talked about a lot less than Babel, and I feel like that's because it's a different, way different kind of book. It's a weird, crazy book about a girl named June Hayward who is trying to be an author, and she's not that fantastic, and she has an Asian frenemy who is really popular as a writer by a freak accident. And I don't feel like this is spoiling anything because it's in the jacket and it's talked about so much. By a freak accident, her friend ends up passing away and she is in possession of her last manuscript, and she ends up pretending that it's hers, and it's this whole jaunt of appropriation. Again, it is RF Kuang making social commentary through her characters, but this time, instead of the character declaiming all of these things all the time, she shows you these things through the character's behavior. And this is when I'm sitting there reading this saying, it's happening. She's getting better. The only reason I read this after Babel was because I bought this and Babel at the same time. I was like, well, I'm just gonna read it because I had such a mixed experience with the Poppy War and then Babel. And this one was the easiest to read. I definitely marked things, but they were because they were good. Like, for instance, there's a part in the book where she goes on a rant about how she's so sick of these people who are challenging her about this book that she fake wrote, that sit there making points that they're wrong about. They don't know what they're talking about. They're basically like, you know, uninformed internet trolls, right? She's like, I'm ready for them. Like, I already have my argument. And it's such a great example of, in the midst of performance, in the midst of appropriation, like, you know that you stole that book. The fact that you would get mad about anything is wild. Like, that they don't know what they're talking about. You didn't write the book. Like, what are you saying? The way that people who behave like this will start to believe their own lies is wild. And she writes that experience of watching that happen, because when you see that happening from the outside, you're like, what? Like, you feel crazy. Like, what is wrong with you? While the book itself, I don't feel like is where she's gonna end up, it's still really good. I'd recommend anybody to pick it up if you want to just read something interesting. It's not the usual. It'll really make you laugh. Like, it's funny. This girl's so crazy, and the way that it ends is perfect, because like, you think that everything is always supposed to have like a tidy ending. There's supposed to be like the, you know, the action up to the climax, and some things just keep going, you know? Why I thought I would love it, I didn't think I would love it, but I had it and I gave it a chance, and it sounded different enough that I felt like, let's see, and it was worth it. Why it's not the best of the best. It's a story that makes you think, but it's still not quite there yet. I'm gonna do two at the same time, because The Song of Achilles and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, they are in the worst of the best, and I know there's gonna be people who are like, what? They're in the worst of the best for the same reason. They're both really good books. I really like the stories. I like the love stories in both of them. Song of Achilles is the story of Achilles from the lens of the young man who loves him. Most of us know how this ends. And then The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is the story of Evelyn Hugo. She's not a real person, even though Taylor Jenkins Reid will really make you feel like people are real people. Story of Evelyn Hugo as told by her. And while both had surprising elements in them, in the end, I think I was waiting for like the heartbreak. I was waiting for the moment of like where everything was going and you were like, Evelyn Hugo had that a little more. This is about an old Hollywood starlet from the 1950s who worked through the 80s. She was of Cuban descent. She was like a Hollywood bombshell with blonde hair, and she definitely passed for white in certain ways. She just had a great tan. I know that this has gotten a lot of flack, because why does Taylor Jenkins Reid keep writing about people of color and kind of profiting off of the otherness of those people? And I get that. In here though, I haven't read the other ones, so I can't say. Like, Carrie Soto also gets flack for sure, but in here she's definitely a white lady. And if you are Hispanic and you understand that there are white ladies who are Hispanic, you understand that Taylor Jenkins Reid wrote her perfectly. Now, what her experience is with this becoming, I don't know, or being. I mean, she writes a white woman. She writes some nuance into it, like when she's very young, and then she talks about eventually like an interaction with like a housekeeper. But this is not a story about a Cuban woman playing a white lady. This is a story about a white lady who happens to be Cuban. It's like the Hollywood starlet difficulties during those years. I don't think anything was like wildly unexpected. Why it's a great book, because it is a great book, is that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes really, really well. And reading her books feels exciting. You just blow through them. When I first read Daisy Jones and the Six, I really thought that it might be a true story, like based on a true story. I looked up, was this a fictionalized account of a true story? Daisy Jones and the the Six is by far a phenomenal book. But this one, not so much. And this one, not so much too, for the same reason, because again, like it's just the typical story. There was nothing really unexpected. And I'll leave it there because I'm not spoiling anything. Why I thought I would love them. I love a Greek anything. And I love a 50s, like early Hollywood anything. It's just something so glamorous about those stories. At the same time, like there's only so many versions of the same story that you can tell from that time, I feel like. Like I want something new and exciting. I don't want, like, it's like with the Gothic stories. Like stop locking them in the same house. The hidden thing can't be always the same topic. I wish that there were more surprises to the story. I think maybe I just knew the story too well. The best of the best. There are 4 of them and they are spectacular. This one, this is how you lose the Time War. I don't think I have heard anybody on the internet appropriately describe what this book is about because it's so weird. It's basically a love story and love letters written from disparate places, times. They're the same essences, but they keep appearing in different timelines in kind of like a cat and mouse chase. It is spectacular. Like you are waiting for the letters because there's like an in-between like story going on, and then there's a letter and there's a letter back and forth, and you're waiting for the letters. Those letters. Why I thought I would love it, I didn't. I was not sure, but it kept coming up as like the most amazing book. And by like the 12th person who said this is the most amazing book and I can't explain to you why, I was like, well, I have to read that. Why I did love it is because I feel like I can explain to you why, but that the words won't make the sense I want it to make. I cried. It made that kind of sense. It's just love. It's love no matter what. It's love no matter space, no matter time, no matter circumstance. And I don't even mean that from a romantic way. It's just love. And if you've ever loved somebody that much, especially if you've lost somebody and you know that no matter what space and time continuum will exist, that you are always going to love them, read this story. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches is on the best of the best because it was just so absolutely vibes. There was every type of person represented in this book, billed as like a Halloween-y type book, but it's really a Christmas book because what happens in it is Christmassy, but because she's a witch, those are always like Halloween-y. It's the first time that I've read a holiday table book, like, you know, the books that are on the table for the holiday. I read it slowly because like the writing is just so lovely and it's like reading a fairy tale. It was really, really good. I enjoyed all of my time with this story. I liked all of the characters. They had so much personality. The stakes are really low, but surprising for you to be able to do the holiday table thing and surprise somebody with what the stakes end up being. It was just really well done. And I think she's writing another one and I'm gonna have to read it. Like I remember speeding through it because I was like, you know, I gotta finish the Halloween-y story, and then stopping myself and actually slowing down because the vibes created were purposeful and I was missing it. Why I thought I would love it, I didn't. Another one. I was just like, these tables are always so cute and I always want to get something off of them, but I feel like all these books are just no bueno. But this one had so many reviews, like I had heard of it so many places, I was like, I'm gonna take the risk, and it was really good. Why I did end up loving it, it's just the most simplistic story that was no way, shape, or form boring at all. It was like a hug for my brain. What is it about? This is a story about Mika Moon. She is a witch in Great Britain. Again, we love a British story. She lives in a witchy world where witches are not supposed to be around each other because crazy things happen when too much magic gets around. And so she's part of a society where they meet very seldomly and they all kind of live in isolation. And then she's asked to be a teacher for a trio of little witches. That goes against everything she's allowed to do, but she takes a chance and it turns into this really cute story that is full of a cast of characters that feels like a whole little village. It feels very Gilmore Girls. It's like all the cute little people in the village. Six of Crows, Leigh Bardugo. Like I said, I am glad that I read this first. This story is about Kaz Brecker. It's kind of like set in Amsterdam, but it's in a different world. So it's Rotterdam. It's very like European vibes. It's basically a heist, which sounds like a very particular type of scenario, but it's not. Like, it's a heist by such morally gray characters that you love so much. They are bad guys, but they're just fantastic. All of them. Every last one of them you love so much. And they're so, like, there's reasons why they're bad, but they're not like secretly good. Like, they're still bad, and it's great. This is part of a duology. Crooked Kingdom is the second one. The reason why I thought I would love it is because people whose opinions that I trusted kept saying that Leigh Bardugo was a great author. And so I got this one because it looked interesting in the store. Even though I'm not like a big heisty girl, it's not just a heist. Like, it's really about the characters, and she writes a character like no other. Why I ended up loving it is because she writes a character like no other. And the way that this one ended, I did not love, but the way the series ended, amazing. It's really the series altogether. It's just fantastic. And finally, Jennette McCurdy. I'm glad my mom died. I listened to this one on audiobook. She narrates. I love a behind the scenes story. So that's initially why I listened to this. I wanted to hear about all of the gory details behind Nickelodeon at the time. I don't think I've ever heard of like a network as a whole or a project that had so many kids run through it that did not have some kind of problems going on in relation to how they were handling those relationships with those kids. Like, I'm waiting for the Mickey Mouse Club story. I don't think Disney's ever gonna let that out, but that was my expectation going into this. I did not expect to read about the parental exploitation side of this, even though that's in the news so much. Like, there was a whole flock of child stars who ended up being broke when I was growing up, who had come up slightly before me because there hadn't been any protections for them and their families had spent all of their money. Think Gary Coleman. There were protections put in place. So I feel like you don't hear those stories as often anymore, but the side of like the parent wanting this thing for you so much and you not even really wanting it, and what that looks like and what that feels like and how abusive it can be, it's so heartbreaking. Like, it makes you wonder if you should ever let your kids get anywhere near the entertainment business when they're still small, because they might not find it scary. They might see like people on TV and be like, ooh, I would want to do that, but it's a business and it's gonna be harmful no matter what. And then suddenly you're the monster. Like, as a parent, you're the one who is pushing this train forward when they're like, no, I don't want to do it. And you're saying to yourself and to them like, well, you just don't understand. You don't understand what work is. You don't understand what being responsible is. But it's really that you want this thing and you don't realize that you've morphed, and the lengths that you're willing to go to. And then like how some of these parents can maybe feel like the child's like ungrateful, like everything I got for you I did for you, but it's because you would have wanted that. Like, they never wanted that. It's really well written, and it speaks to, even outside of child acting, like it speaks to the damage that parents do to kids all of the time because they're kind of trying to fulfill something for themselves through their children. They don't see it. Listen to it or read it. It's just so well done and so heartbreaking. Just such a reflection of how difficult relationships with our parents can be. Why I thought I would love it. Nickelodeon, I grew up during like the heyday of Nick. Clarissa Explains It All that. The creator of Jennette's show started back in that time. So just historically, I thought it would be interesting to hear about some things. Why I ended up loving it is the complicated relationship that she had with her mom, not because she was a stage mom, but because she was a flawed human being trying to live through her daughter. Just reminded me of so many people who weren't on TV and so many experiences that were just like this, but not broadcast to millions of people. Whew. That's it, guys. I don't know if TikTok's still gonna be around for me to do this again next year, but if it is, I will. If it's not, I'm sure I will see my TikTok friends somewhere else because they're spectacular and talented, and I know that they're gonna end up finding another platform that's gonna realize that. It was fantastic talking to you guys again. See you in the next one. Bye, guys.